Five phrases that instantly make people respect you, Part 1. Hook and Inner Conflict, New York, 9 a.m. The air in the meeting room was heavy. Michael, a young manager, 34 years old, sat at the head of the table trying to keep a smile on his face as his colleague, Jason, spoke over his presentation. Jason had a loud, confident voice, and every time he spoke, the whole room seemed to lean toward him. Michael was about to continue presenting, but Jason cut in again. "I don't think that's going to work, Mike." A few people laughed, a few nodded, and in that moment, Michael felt the blood rush to his face. He clenched his fists. His throat tightened. A voice rose inside his head. "Why do I keep letting them walk over me like this?" He took a deep breath, and then he exploded anyway. "If you actually listened until the end, maybe you'd understand, Jason." The room went silent, but not out of respect, out of shock. Jason raised an eyebrow. Another colleague let out a small laugh. The atmosphere grew heavy. The meeting went on, but Michael could no longer hear anything. In everyone's eyes, he was no longer the one in control of the conversation. He was the one being controlled by his emotions. That afternoon, he returned to his small apartment in Brooklyn. When the door closed, the room was filled only with the sound of the fan and warm light on the wall. He sat down, opened his phone, replayed the recording of the meeting, and heard his own voice, high, shaky, out of control. He closed his eyes. A wave of shame spread through him. Why is it that every time I want to be respected, things just get worse? On the table, buried under a pile of papers, was the small book he'd bought months ago. Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. He opened to a random page. A line seemed to look straight at him. "When others shout, remain calm. For the one who controls himself controls the situation." He read it 3 times. Each word echoed through the silence of the room. The next day, Michael still went to the office. Same blue shirt, black coffee, sunlight pouring through the 15th floor window. But there was something different in his eyes, the quiet of someone who has just touched his own limits. At lunch, Sarah, a close co-worker, sat down next to him. "You okay?" "Yesterday was a bit intense." Michael forced a faint smile. "Yeah, I reacted pretty stupidly." Sarah wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "I get it. Sometimes people just push your patience. But you know, sometimes staying silent makes them respect you more than any words." That simple sentence planted a seed in his mind. That night, he searched for Stoic communication on YouTube. He watched videos about Epictetus, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius. He paused at one quote. "It's not what happens to you that hurts you, but how you react to it." Epictetus. Michael slowly closed his laptop. Outside, the city was still loud. Car horns, voices, the whir of the fan. But inside him, something quiet was forming. He realized, maybe all this time, he'd been seeking power in the wrong place. Not in speaking louder than others, not in winning every argument, but in controlling himself before he opened his mouth. He opened his notebook and wrote a short line. "Tomorrow, I will try to speak differently. Not to win against others, but to win against myself." He closed the notebook. Breathed in, breathed out. A new decision was forming, small but clear. Starting tomorrow morning, he would no longer react on instinct. He would train 5 responses, 5 Stoic phrases, to make others listen, not out of fear, but out of respect. Night light fell across his face, half in light, half in shadow. Michael lifted his head and whispered into the silence. No need to shout. Just be right. And calm. The room remained still. But within that stillness, something had changed. It was the beginning of a man learning how to make the world listen, using nothing but his composure. That night, after writing the final line in his notebook, Michael turned off the light and sat in the dark. The city outside was still loud, cars, horns, people. But inside, he felt something unfamiliar, a quiet he had never known before. He thought about the meeting yesterday, about the moment he lost control, and about how Marcus Aurelius had once reminded, "The one who controls himself controls the situation." From that moment, he knew, if he wanted to be heard, he couldn't just speak louder. He had to speak the right way. And the next morning, he began his journey of practicing 5 Stoic responses. Phrases that would not only change conversations, but change the way people saw him. Part 2, Stoic Insight, 5 main phrases. 1. I understand your point, but I disagree. Monday morning, the meeting room was full again. Jason, as always, was the loudest voice. He presented a new idea, and once again, it was heading in the wrong direction. Michael could have cut him off, argued like before, but he stopped himself. He took a deep breath, waited until Jason finished. Then he looked him straight in the eye, his voice low and slow. I understand your point, but I disagree. No one said anything for a few seconds. The atmosphere shifted. This was no longer an argument, but a statement. No anger, no need to justify himself, only clarity. That sentence did not demand victory or defeat. It simply affirmed that he still controlled himself while everyone else was losing their composure. Others could be loud. They could try to appear strong. But he, the one whose breath remained steady and whose gaze stayed calm, was the one truly holding the power. In Stoic philosophy, this is separating emotion from judgment. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If something makes you angry, it is not the thing itself, but the way you look at it." When you say, I understand, but I disagree, you send a signal. I hear you. I respect you. But my mind remains free. 2. I don't find that appropriate. That afternoon, Michael went out to a bar with colleagues. Amid the laughter, one of them made an inappropriate joke about a female co-worker. Everyone laughed. He almost laughed along. Old habit. But he stopped. Dim lights reflected in his beer glass. He set the glass down, looked straight at the man, and said softly, I don't find that appropriate. No one said anything. The music kept playing, but the energy dropped for a moment. He wasn't angry. He didn't shame anyone. He simply drew a line. And strangely, a few minutes later, the same man nodded and said quietly, You're right. The power of that phrase lies here. It doesn't attack, it reflects. It shows that you know who you are, and you won't break your own values just to fit in. Seneca once said, A man who respects himself will always be respected by others. In a world where people try so hard to please the crowd, knowing when to say no is a rare form of strength. And sometimes, respect begins the moment you refuse to laugh at the wrong joke. Let's talk when we can do so respectfully. A week later, Michael had a meeting with his superior, Mr. Harris, known for his temper. The discussion quickly turned into an argument. Mr. Harris kept cutting him off, his voice rising sharp. Michael felt his blood heat up. His hands began to tremble. In his mind, the old voice screamed, "Fight back! Don't let him disrespect you." But this time he stopped. He breathed deeply. Then he said slowly, word by word, "I think we should continue this conversation when we can do so respectfully." The room went quiet. Mr. Harris leaned back in his chair, looked at him for a few seconds, then lowered his voice. "All right, we'll talk later this afternoon." In that moment, Michael understood. Power is not shouting louder. It is choosing when you participate. Epictetus once taught, you cannot control the behavior of others, but you can control what you accept. This phrase goes beyond communication. It is the expression of self-mastery, a skill every mature man and woman must learn. When you set a condition for respect, you're not running away. You're redefining the game. 4. I'd prefer not to continue this conversation. Friday night, Michael and Sarah, his ex, sat in their old cafe. The conversation started light, then turned into blame, then into attacks. She spoke. He replied. Both their voices kept rising. He felt his heart race. Old memories flooded in, a storm of tenderness and resentment. But then he stopped. He looked at her, breathed slowly, and said, "I'd prefer not to continue this conversation." Not because he wanted to avoid anything, but because he had realized there are arguments that don't need a winner. They just need someone who knows when to stop. She went quiet. The air softened. He stood up, paid the bill, and left the cafe. On the way home, he remembered a line from Marcus Aurelius. "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed." The modern world teaches us that having the last word is strength. But the Stoics understand choosing peace over victory is the highest level of power. 5. That's your opinion, and I respect it, but I don't share it. On Sunday, Michael visited home. During dinner, his father talked about how young people these days lack discipline and commitment. With a firm tone, he said, "You need to do what I did if you want others to respect you." Michael listened silently, without interrupting. He took a sip of water, then said slowly, "I respect your opinion, but I don't share it." The room went quiet. His father looked at him for a few seconds, then gave a small smile. "Now I see you've really grown up." Michael hadn't expected such a gentle sentence to change the atmosphere so much. He realized, when you can hold your ground without insulting anyone, people are forced to respect you, even when they don't agree. Seneca once wrote, "The worst kind of slave is the slave of other people's opinions." True freedom is not saying whatever you want, but knowing when to speak and speaking with a calm mind. End of part 2. When Michael left the house, the sun had already sunk behind the distant buildings. He walked slowly, cold wind brushing his collar, but inside he felt a strange warmth. He realized the phrases he'd learned didn't just make others go quiet, they made him quiet. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of someone who knows he's strong enough not to prove anything. Real power, he thought, lies in the breath before we speak. That was the first time in his life Michael understood the meaning of stoic calm. That calmness is not avoidance, but mastery over every reaction, every emotion, and his own mind. After that evening, when Michael returned to his apartment, the city was still awake. Lights from the buildings shone through the window, like thoughts that refused to settle. He sat down, closed his eyes, and felt something very strange. Silence no longer made him feel small. It made him feel strong. Everything began to slow down. Arguments no longer mattered as much. Attacks no longer carried the same weight. The only thing that remained was his own breath. He realized, calm doesn't come from knowledge. It comes from practice. Like a muscle, if you don't train it daily, it grows weak. And that was when he began his Stoic ritual, a series of small, simple habits, enough to turn composure into a natural reflex. Part 3. Stoic Protocol. Michael set his alarm earlier than usual. At 6 a.m., with dim light seeping through the curtains, he sat down on the floor, hands resting on his knees. No music, no phone, just him and his breath. 1. Stillness breath, morning. He inhaled deeply, held it for 3 seconds, then exhaled slowly. With each inhale, he whispered to himself, I don't need to be loud to be right. For the first time, he truly felt his heartbeat, felt his body soften bit by bit. The noisy thoughts began to fade. He repeated it 3 times, not as some spiritual ritual, but as a way to reset himself before the day. When he finished, he smiled faintly, as if he had just reclaimed the first control of the day, control over himself. Everything else, he thought, is just an extension of this breath. To command practice, daytime. Before going to work, he opened the small notebook where he had written the 5 Stoic responses. For each sentence, he read slowly, clearly, like a promise to himself. I understand your point, but I disagree. I don't find that appropriate. Let's talk when we can do so respectfully. I'd prefer not to continue this conversation. That's your opinion, and I respect it, but I don't share it. Each time he read them, he didn't try to memorize. He tried to feel them. He imagined himself in the meeting room or in the middle of an argument. He saw clearly, his voice deeper, his breath steadier, his gaze more stable. He wasn't learning how to attack. He was learning how not to be dragged into other people's emotions. In a world where everyone wants to speak, learning to speak more slowly is a form of strength. Because when you control the pace of your words, you control the pace of your mind. 3. Night reflection. Evening. Night fell. The city grew quieter, and Michael opened his notebook once again. He didn't write plans. He didn't judge himself. He wrote just one short line. Where was I calm today? Some days, he wrote, when the boss got angry. Other days, when the waiter forgot my order. Small things. But he realized that each time he remained calm, the outside world shifted a little too. Like a lake going smooth once you stop throwing stones into it. He didn't need to be perfect. He only needed to recognize one truth. Calmness is not a natural reaction. It is a trained reflex. Seneca once wrote, "No one becomes wise just by reading. We become wise by practicing stillness every day." Michael closed the notebook. He turned off the light. The room sank into darkness again. But in his mind, there was a small light, the kind that appears only when someone has started to control himself. And then he understood. Calmness is not a gift. It is a skill. A skill anyone can learn if they are patient enough to begin with the first breath each morning, the first sentence of the day, and the last moment of silence before sleep. Repetition, he wrote, turns calm into reflex. And that is where true strength begins. After 7 days, everything in Michael had changed, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, the way winter turns into spring. He no longer tried to control people, only himself. In every meeting, every glance, every conversation, he realized, when you are calm, the world slows down with you. And it is there that respect begins. Part 4. Reflection and Stillness. Early morning, Michael stood by the window. The first light of day shone between the tall buildings, reflecting onto the table where his notebook lay open. On the pages were 5 sentences. Simple lines that had changed the way he lived, the way he spoke, and the way he showed up in the world. He read each one again softly, as if revisiting 5 chapters of an inner journey. I understand your point, but I disagree. Self-control. I don't find that appropriate. Self-respect. Let's talk when we can do so respectfully. Emotional mastery. I'd prefer not to continue this conversation. Letting go. That's your opinion, and I respect it, but I don't share it. Independent thinking. 5 phrases, 5 lessons. But they all pointed back to 3 things: control, respect, calm authority. Control yourself, respect yourself, and express authority through composure. Michael closed his eyes, breathed in, breathed out. He remembered the man he was a week ago. Frustrated, speaking fast, trying to be heard by speaking louder. And he smiled, because now he understood. You don't need to prove your strength when you have become the proof of it. The calm man does not need to prove his strength. He is the proof. Marcus Aurelius, outside the sounds of the city began. Cars, footsteps, voices. But inside Michael, everything stayed still. He no longer feared being interrupted. He no longer needed to win arguments. Because true victory does not lie in making others quiet, but in keeping your own stillness. He whispered, as a reminder to the listener and to himself, be still, be strong, be stoic. And if you are hearing this, try one small thing. Replay the Stoic protocol every morning for 7 days. Don't just listen, practice it. Because only when calm becomes a reflex, respect comes naturally, like breath.